Hi everybody. Today we're going to learn how to make this nice, sturdy kayak rack. So here's what you'll need. Let's start with something to saw on, because you'll be doing a lot of that and it'll make your life easier. Then you'll need some saws, a hammer and chisel, and screws. For this rack, I used 62 deck screws. 54 were 3-inch and the remaining 8 were 2.5-inch. You could definitely get away with using fewer if you want though. Next, you'll need a tape measure and pencil, safety gear, a drill, and something to help draw straight lines and square corners up. A chop saw or circular saw would also chop a whole lot of time off this build. As for wood, I went and got 6 2x4x8s and one 4x4x10 that they sawed in half at the store. Try to make sure at least one of those 2x4s is treated, since it'll be in contact with the ground, along with anything else that'll be out in the elements. Even though I showed you everything you need, I suggest starting off with, after you measure your kayak, a little drawing to figure out how much wood you personally need and whereabouts to make the cuts. For example, if you need 3 5-foot pieces, even though 2 2x4s yield enough length, you won't end up happy. The rule of thumb for plastic kayaks is that you want to store them upside down with supports at 30% and 70% of their length. So, when you measure your kayak, just take 40% of the length, and that's how far apart the innermost points of the branches need to be, because that's where the kayak will make contact. But before you run ahead and make cuts, make sure that real estate is actually available on the kayak. Mine had some eye bolts that came really close to being in the way, but I caught it in time and made the needed adjustments. You can see I have some of my tools on the ground. It's definitely a hazard, but I like a little chaos. I mean, take a gander at the rest of the garage. Basically, you want to start with constructing each side before eventually connecting them at the top. For those sides, once you decide how much vertical spacing you want between branches, I did 22 inches with 8 inches at each end, make your notches. I did this by sawing at the edges and then chiseling them out. I'm aware that there are easier ways, but I'm just a goober in a garage. You'll be able to figure out a way to make do with what you have as well. If you don't want to do this step, you don't really need to, but the notches do add some stability so that everything doesn't rely on the screws. Use gravity to your advantage. Along with the notches, you need to cut an indent on the inner side of the top so that the eventual top beam has somewhere to live. Make sure not to cut on the same side as the notches though. Now we can move on to the branches. I decided, after struggling to measure the kayak width, to make them 2.5 feet each, though I could have gotten away with 2 feet. I then put one 3-inch screw through the top at a 45-degree angle and 2 through the bottom, also at a 45-degree angle. For the braces, I drilled 2 3-inch screws perpendicularly into that thick 4x4 and 2 2.5-inch screws perpendicularly into each branch. Only do this for the top 2 braces. For the time being, we'll leave the bottom brace on the back burner. Next, I flip the whole thing over to attach the base. It's important that it's long enough to extend past the farthest edge, since you don't want the thing to tip over on you when, after you get back from a long day out and you're all tired, drop a kayak at the edge. To make things a little easier, I put some scrap wood underneath to raise the base up to the right spot for drilling. 4 long screws later, and the thing almost stands. Hey now, the top is on and we're standing unassisted. This part is super easy because we already measured everything out, right? 2 long screws to the top on each side and we're moving on. Don't worry about everything being perfectly square here. When you attach the bottom beam, all of that work will be done right for you. Bottom's a bit trickier because there really wasn't a great way to put screws in. I chose to go in through the front and back at some convoluted angle. It worked, but it wasn't fun. If you can think of a better way, post it in the comments. Last step is the cross brace. You don't need an engineering degree to see that this thing's not stable yet. An easy way to make these cuts is to hold the plank in place behind the rack and draw your pencil lines from the front. Cut the top side and then do the bottom. Then it can be held in with one 3-inch screw on each end. If that makes you uneasy, add another. If you remembered that we didn't finish the bottom supports before, congratulatory. But now that we have our bases on, it's easy to measure how long these scrappy boards need to be. Plus, if you're off a little, it's really no problem. 2 3-inch screws in each end and we're finally done. I guess I was a bit paranoid because I added an extra couple screws at angles through the back of the cross brace. Anywho, check out your new beautiful kayak rack. Paint it, stain it, do whatever to it. Actually, one thing that I've been thinking about doing myself is adding some foam pads to the branches to widen the load plane on the kayaks. Plastic does deform over time. For now, I left it because I got these for $100 on Craigslist, so I don't care that much. Something to think about when building, aside from that 40% rule and all that goes along with it, is to decide how much room you want below the bottom kayak as well as above the top. One thing I do differently the next time around is leave a little more vertical space for the top kayak. As you might be able to see here in a minute, it's blocked from sliding all the way back by the top beam, creating unnecessary torque on the base. The main 4x4 beams bend a little already with the added weight, so I'd definitely not recommend skimping on the thickness. Stick to the plan here. Finally, always pre-drill your holes. Even though the wood is thick enough where it probably won't split, it just makes putting in screws much easier, especially when going in at weird angles. Overall, I like this rack because it saves a ton of room, has broad contact planes, and even comes with built-in slots to put paddles. Anything else that needs to be stored with your kayaks can be put underneath or on top if you want to add a shelf above the top spot. If you need it, I put a slightly nicer picture of the plans down in the description, along with some links to purchase your building materials. So folks, this whole thing can feasibly be built in a few hours with a little determination and elbow grease. It's a fun project and will work wonders to help declutter your garage, shed, or yard. If you have mounts or a strong enough ceiling, you may want to instead consider making a pulley system for around the same cost to hoist these bad boys up high. Whatever you choose, just get on with it so you can get back out there and paddle into the sunset. Have fun!